Lamb chops are really good stuff. Welcome to the May 15th, 2018 Committee of the Whole meeting. Mr. Crumstock, fire stations are up.
The first item, obviously, is a status report where we are sitting with the fire station project, and obviously, Fire Chief Terry Valentino will kick it off with who's here, but we do have a PowerPoint to go through the presentation and again, continue some of the discussions that we had. But again, this is really in just for status at this point in time. Obviously, we do have some other updates that we can provide, but when we get to the end, we will proceed with that. And this is just one status report, which leads to number 3 later on in the night too. But with that, I turn it over to the chief.
Hello. Hey.
Hey, Chief, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council and people of Rolling Meadows. So this has been a long time coming. I've been the Deputy Fire Chief, and I've been the Chief for about 6 months now. This is an ongoing project, the fire station relocation and rebuild. And so today is really exciting because we have some nuts and bolts and things to add and show you pen to paper for what's going on. So I just want to introduce, so as the Fire Chief, I'm tasked with providing the identified needs of the department and not the wants, basically in regards to the operations of the fire department, logistics, safety, dispatching, of any matters related to providing emergency services in the city. I'm not a construction project manager, and I'm not a finance or business major, and I'm not a contractor or an architect. So, but I have been tasked with steering this fire station project from land acquisition, development and design, and finally building of the 2 new stations, which is multi-tiered and a complex project. So, but what I am is an advocate for the citizens, and what I want to do is I need to provide the best service with the best trained personnel and with the best equipment, no matter the time of day, no matter what comes our way and what any internal or external forces come upon us, we provide the best service to the best people in the northwest suburbs. So to set the stage from where we were maybe many years ago, you can pick that number out of your hat. I've been here 4, and where we are now and we are headed. And I'm going to ask Mr. Terry Bohr of R.C. Wegman and his team to provide an overview of how they have guided us through this complex project. And I want to let you know that their team has been overwhelmingly receptive and responsive from day one. So I'm going to ask Mr. Terry Bohr from R.C. Wegman to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and good evening, Council. Before we get to the presentation, which will be done mainly by Scott Ryle from Healy Bender, I just want to review a few of the milestones to kind of set the stage of where we started and where we're at now. So as most of you know, we were brought on a little over 2 years now. It was back in March of 2016. And since that time, we started, our first task was to work with a group of community stakeholders to identify the best possible sites for these 2 stations. So you can check that off the list. That was accomplished. Next, we got into the land acquisition phase, and Healy Bender assisted in the land acquisition phase by doing some preliminary design just to see how the fire stations would fit on the desired sites. So that was kind of the second milestone. Then on October 31st of 2017, we held our first kickoff meeting to begin the design process. So since that time, since October 31st, we've been meeting as a team every 2 weeks to review the status and work through design issues. Also during that time, we've prepared 2 budgets, a schematic design preliminary budget, as well as a design development budget for the Algonquin Road property. We've also completed a schematic design budget for the Hicks Road site, and currently we are approximately 75% completed with the entire design phase for both buildings. The next milestone occurred in April, just this past month, when we completed the demolition of the existing restaurant at the Algonquin site. So that site is now primed, poised, ready for a groundbreaking. We are currently on course to begin construction on the Algonquin site in August of this year. And we anticipate that Hicks Road site would be ready to start approximately 6 to 8 weeks after that. So that's kind of an overview of where we're at from start to finish, of where we're at now. And now I'd like to turn over to Scott, who's going to get into some nice pictures and show you really how the design has progressed. So thank you for your time.
Good evening. My name is Scott Ryle, and if everyone would kind of turn around, take a look at the screen there. So the first, I'm going to go through this very quickly. This is the step-by-step process that we've taken from the beginning. The first step, as Terry stated, was the site acquisition. Again, 3201 Algonquin and 2320 and 2350 Hicks Road. Currently, the Algonquin Road site, the demolition of the existing facility is complete, and the other property at Hicks Road is currently in the process of closing onto the property. Starting off the process, the committee went on several tours of different buildings to get a understanding of size and scale and different programs, to get an understanding of some of the things that they would want to be putting into the program. Once those tours were complete, we put together an adjacency planning diagram, which was a basis for the site acquisition piece, and this included all the parts and pieces that we noticed at those building tours. So we started off with a building, a floor plan that was about 13,400 square feet approximately. That was the planning diagram. And over the course of the next several months, we went through programming exercises to try to right-size the building. We went through more building tours, and we went through multiple revisions. We got it all the way down to approximately 10,900 square feet, and that was like the bare bones program of what we could be doing for the program that was identified. And then we realized that, you know, we don't want to sell yourself short and be obsolete the very first day, so we made sure that we included in additional square footage for things like making the apparatus bay a little bit larger than just the pieces of equipment that you'd have in it. So in the event the future brings in bigger pieces of apparatus, you'd be able to fit it in there. So you don't want to be obsolete the first day. So the floor plan ended up in this configuration. The blue areas are the living quarters, and the pink or red areas are the apparatus bays. The brown areas are the office areas. And during the process of consolidating this, we really were conscious about how people circulated through this, because we understand that seconds matter, and we made sure that we brought down the circulation to one single corridor through the middle, and all of the living quarters are off of that circulation. So we were very conscious about how we were developing this to make sure it is as efficient as possible. In terms of the site, in siting the building on the piece of property, this is Algonquin Road, we pushed the building as far north as possible in order to save some funds and not have to construct as much apron space, which is considerably expensive. There were some additional things like, if you know the site is sloped from the south side where all that big green space is, down to Algonquin Road, is much lower. So in order to take care of the stormwater requirements that MWRD requires, there's going to be some additional under parking lot stormwater storage. The exterior of the building, as of right now, looks like this. The concept of the facility was to take material that is in and around Rolling Meadows, and the facility that's directly next to this building has some stone that's incorporated in the building, so we're gleaning some architectural character from that facility, and some pitched roofs, making it fit into the community a little bit better. Again, here's kind of the front view of what that facility would look like as it kind of goes into the evening, what that would look like. So the front of the building has some offices that are associated with it, and on Hicks Road there'll be training facilities. So those are more office related and office kind of materials. This would be the day room in the back and the living areas. You know, again, incorporating a lot of the residential feel to it, residential materials to make sure that it has a comfortable feel to it. It's a kitchen area, obviously. Moving on to the Hicks Road site. The Hicks Road is following, now I think we have to understand that both of these buildings are going to be extremely similar in nature. The configuration of the floor plan is not exactly the same, but very close. So all of the images that you just saw would be very similar to how the Hicks Road building will be looking. In terms of the site plan that you're seeing here, we didn't have a lot of room to put stormwater on this site either, so we're going to have to be putting underground tanks in this as well to get our stormwater requirements for MWRD. And again, this is the floor plan for Hicks Road. You can see, and everything from the pink, the apparatus bays, to the right are almost exactly identical. So therefore, all of the living quarters and everything still have that single corridor directly into the apparatus bay. In terms of the schedule, we are, as Terry suggested, we are at 75% CDs, and we're targeting the next month, within the next month, to be going out to bid. And that's it. Does anyone have any questions?
Gentlemen and council have questions? This is only a status report, so when will you be coming back to us with another status report?
Probably
prior, or
June.
after we bid out the first Algonquin station.
Yeah.
6, 8, 2 months?
So probably,
August?
Mid-July,
July.
I would say.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Majenkins?
Just a quick question. The Algonquin site's 12,000 some odd square feet?
Right,
And
12,700.
the Hicks one same or a little smaller?
It's a little bit more because we had to rotate the apparatus bay, and there are some engineering things that we had to modify, so that's about 12,009
Okay. Just curious. Thanks.
approximately.
Thanks.
Mr. Cannon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was curious, do we have, I'm assuming I know the answer, but there's no options on the underground water retention? Is there any way that we could do it above ground to save money? Because, I mean, this is really expensive to do it that way.
Boy, we really tried to do that. So our first design incorporated an on-site water detention, but it was about 8 feet deep, 8 to 10 feet deep. So in that really, I would have to take in, for Algonquin Road site, I'd have to take out all the parking on the front of the building because of the way that, if you look at the, here, I'll go back.
I know it's sloped pretty severely.
Yeah. So the front of the building, there's a whole parking lot out in the front.
Yeah, you're talking about the one to the east.
Yeah, we would have to take out. We would have to. Here, we would have to take out.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, that thing doesn't.
I know it doesn't make it onto the screen.
We would have to take out like a big chunk of this in order to do that. So the way that this works is, trucks are able to come in here. They're able to go out in this direction or this direction, right? So this works really well the way for a site configuration, the way for the trucks. In order to do that on site, we'd really have to pull out a lot of that.
Okay.
So we researched a lot of different ways, and we understood your exact question.
Mike, please. Thank you.
Yeah.
The folks at home can't hear.
Sorry.
So-
We went through great lengths to try to do on-site stormwater detention. We understand exactly what you just said, so we really tried to engineer it that way. But due to the way that the site is configured, we were unable to get the volume that we needed for MWRD.
Would it be possible on the Hicks site to even hook on to our neighbors at all? To the?
Oh.
I know his answer. I want to hear your answer.
Well, first of all, the Hicks Road site is extremely compact. We are using every single stitch of land that we have in order to get the building on there. I think we would have to purchase another piece of property if we were to try to do on-site storage.
Okay. The other question I ask is, you made the statement that the second station, Hicks, would not be started to build for 6 to 8 weeks after. So I'm assuming you guys are pros at this, so you're confident we'll get it all under roof before winter?
That's what we're.
I know it's a goal, but you think that that's doable? I mean, with the crazy weather we've been having this year,
typically we look at it as we need to be done with masonry by December 1st.
Okay, and you'll have the roof on at that point, right? Yeah.
Well, I don't know that we'll have the roof on, but the roof isn't as weather dependent as the masonry. Okay. So you can still, you can set trusses, you can put standing seam roof, you can get it dried in even in cold temperatures. But the big issue is with the masonry. So that's going to be where we're going to really push to get the foundations in and get the masonry done by December 1st. That would be our
Okay. Thank you for answering.
Strive for. Yep.
Questions? Anybody else? Mr. Budman, sir?
With us being basically finished with Phase 1 and Phase 2 and 75% on Phase 3, where are we at with the budget compared to where you were on those initial 3 items?
We can tag team on this, Finance Director Melissa Gallagher and I. The original number that you talk about, or that we actually used, obviously the $9 million, that was about 5-6 years ago. So then as each of the steps is taken over, you can say that Land-Ac, it was obviously more expensive than the original. MWRD, stormwater management, is showing much more expensive than expected. You can also look at even some of the overall vehicle exhaust system that needs to be put in. But right now, the tentative number that we're sort of looking at is a little over $13 million.
It's estimated about $13 million at this point in time. That $9 million, of course, was generated several years back as part of the process. Right now, the $13 million is with the contingency, and it's also as a placeholder at this point in time. So when we're out in the process of the bid process in the July timeframe of this year, that's when we'll have that guaranteed price for the vendors when we go out to bid. And I think basically what we've been doing since about October, with the schematic design budget is ensuring that we're going out to vendors, and we're talking about Wegman and Healy going out to vendors and making sure they're getting costs and prices for those specific items. And the pages are long on those spreadsheets when we meet, but those are the things that are as placeholders within each of those items, such as structural steel, the masonry, all those items. So those items in total, with the land ac and the demo, have been about 13 million, the 9 million to the 13 million. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now, and that's why we're just kind of giving you a ballpark and no action needed this time, but we just wanted to bring it back. And right now, when you say you're 75% done with schematic design, as you were saying, Scott, the overall plan at this point in time is pretty well set. With that 13 million as a ballpark at placeholder estimate. And once we go to bid in the July timeframe, that's when we'll know the final number. And that will assist us as our financial advisors here, that will assist us in the bond process. And also excellent timing with the audit that we're presenting for the 2017 year in June to the City Council. So does that help you?
Yeah, and I'm just curious as to phase 1, 2, and 3, which are basically complete, right? Where are we at for those three? Before we get into any construction costs, where are we at with those three costs?
We're right. The milestones have been achieved, so we're pretty much right on line where we should be at this point in time. The land acquisition has already taken place for Algonquin. The Hicks Road property has already been included within the all-in price that we're talking about as far as the placeholder of 13 million. So right now we're there online in achieving the milestones.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Budman? No? Anybody else? Seeing nothing else, let's move on to the most exciting part of the evening is animal control. Okay, Chief?
You set the bar really high by saying that.
I just wanted you to know that.
I do have a PowerPoint, and I do think there's a clicker. Somebody... Oh, you got it?
All right. We are ready.
Yes, I'm sure you are. Well, good evening, everyone. Alderman, Mayor.
Yes.
I am here to talk about animal control issues. This matter was brought up, I think it was a couple weeks ago, by Alderman Majikis during a council meeting. He had some questions regarding animal control. And so here we are. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief presentation of some of the responsibilities of the police department. I know you have probably some questions. I think most of them are probably reflected or going to be directed toward wildlife, skunks, raccoon issues. At least that's what I think is what's going to happen. And to move this PowerPoint forward, I'm not really good at AV. Is the, which button do I hit? Thank you. All right, so I'm going to start off by identifying what our responsibilities, our main responsibilities for animal control are for the police department. First and foremost, obviously, is to protect the public. It's to protect the public regarding animals against dangerous and sick animals. One of the second responsibilities we have, obviously, is to locate lost and stray domesticated animals, hopefully reuniting them with their owners. And the third is to enforce city codes regarding animal violations, such as letting your dogs run loose, owners not picking up after their animals in public property, and obviously also to enforce other state laws and to investigate complaints regarding animal abuse. So those are mainly our three primary responsibilities for the police department. That's a happy little camper right there. I think that his name is Rocky. But as we move forward, we're actually pretty busy with just those couple things I mentioned earlier. We average about 200 calls a year regarding animal-related incidents. That makes up about 2% of our service calls, so we do spend quite a bit of time with those matters. Almost every day we're responding to some type of animal-related call, and there's a breakdown for the last 4 years of all the calls. Like I said, we average probably about 200 calls a year. I know most of the questions, like I said, I think are going to be directed towards wild animals. That was not taken in Rolling Meadows, and I can assure you we have no grizzly bears here. I have seen a couple of Chicago bears traveling through, but no bear problems. But like I said,
Chief, I think that was in Banger's the chickens and the eggs.
Yes, Alderman Banger could actually probably give this presentation regarding animals. But controlling a nuisance wildlife in Rolling Meadows, all mammals, for the most part, are protected by Illinois law. In addition, most of your birds and so forth are also protected by federal law. So wild animals, whether they're skunks, raccoons, coyotes, are protected by Illinois law, and really the authority on that is the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Actually, we have to comply with their regulations, the police department, regarding animal control measures. They really are the authority and responsible for the conservation of wildlife in the state of Illinois. And one of the reasons for that is animals are actually considered, the wildlife are considered the property of the state, of the people of the state of Illinois. What that means, basically, if you own a home and say you do have a skunk living underneath your deck or a raccoon living in your shed, just because it's on your property does not necessarily mean that animal belongs to you and you could take measures to do whatever you want with that animal. Actually, like I said, those animals are protected by state law through the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and the Illinois Conservation Law. That doesn't mean, however, that if you do have a nuisance problem regarding a wild animal, a skunk, a raccoon, you can take measures to remove that animal. You will first have to actually get a permit through the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. The permits are free. But in order to get that permit, too, you have to show that the animal is either destroying property or is a safety hazard to you. Otherwise, they will not issue you that permit. So if you basically have, say, you had a raccoon that walks across your yard and you want to remove and you want to do the legal channels to do that, you probably could not be able to get a permit for that unless, like I said, it was actually destroying property, eating a hole through your roof, taking residence inside your attic and so forth. If you are able to get a permit, there's also some regulations with that. Raccoons, skunks, if you do catch those, you have to euthanize them. You cannot transport them to, a lot of people, they want to catch that animal, they don't want it in their property or whatever, and then they want to let it go somewhere, but you cannot do that. That's against the law. You could be fined. You guys should be arrested for doing that. So you couldn't trap a raccoon or a skunk and actually, put it to Bussey Woods or Park District property or release it by a creek or, a neighbor's property that you don't like. You can't really do that. You actually have to euthanize that animal. So like I said, there's several restrictions on that. And for that, reason, a recommendation from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. I actually talked to their animal biologist and even the police department. If you do have a problem with a wild animal, because I think she, as I talked to her, I think they issued about 80,000 permits for skunks, raccoons in the, I think it was Division 2 district, which we're part of. So it's a huge number regarding nuisance animals and so forth in Illinois. But the recommendation is really to contract out with an organization that specializes, a company that specializes in that. Just like if you had, a problem with mice or termites in your house, you call an exterminator. The police department and, like I said, Illinois Department of Natural Resources does recommend hiring a professional. If you trap an animal, obviously, if you corner it, they can be pretty vicious and dangerous. They do. Some of them do have diseases. They could scratch you. They could bite you. So that really is the recommendation about hiring a professional. There's a couple things, though, too, with wildlife. We really do, like I said, the numbers of wildlife in this area, and a lot of people do move to the suburbs, this area, because of the wildlife, because of the parks and so forth. It would be almost impossible to be able to remove all those animals. It would be a huge expense, and really it would be a very short-term gain because they would just migrate back there. Once you clear out an area, those animals will then take up residence here. Most animals are territorial, meaning that even the biologist told me if you caught say a coyote or a raccoon and you transported it to another location, that animal would most likely be attacked and killed by those other animals of the same species that has taken up that area. They're very territorial. So if we did remove all the animals, it would be a very short-term goal. Really, the recommendation is really trying to coexist with those, and you can take steps as a resident, as a homeowner, to limit nuisance animals, and those are fairly easy as they show up there. First of all, a lot of people feed them, and that just attracts them to the home, whether it's the homeowner that's having a problem or the neighbor. One of the recommendations, obviously, is don't feed the wild animals. If you have bird feeders out there, make sure you clean up after the bird feeders, because if you don't, you're going to attract the skunks and the raccoons and then the other predators on top of that. If you do have openings like underneath your shed or underneath your deck, try to secure those. Don't make it an invitation for those animals, and you can control a lot of those nuisance problems. Like I said, I don't know if you have some specific questions regarding wildlife or animal control, but at this point, I'm opening up for questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Chief. Does anyone have questions? Ms. Majakis, since you brought it up first.
Well, thank you. I appreciate, Chief, you taking the time to just stress this, because I just, with the weather and stuff, we're seeing more and more critters out and about and stuff. So, but basically, I know last year, the year before, we had put some money in the budget on the skunks and stuff.
We have a $3,000 line item that deals with animal control, and I can tell you for the last few years, we do use most of it for skunks, raccoons, vermins, other little critters.
Yeah.
No
okay.
chickens.
Okay.
Yeah, most of those funds are also for stray dogs and so forth. I do have to pay impound fees for the animals.
Sure.
I know Rolling Meadows Police Department has many police departments in the area used to actually provide and actually trap those animals. Most agencies got away. I think there's very few that actually even do that. Obviously, it puts our officers up at liability and risk also, where it's easier to have regular professional crawling around in attics or in crawl spaces trying to trap animals. And I know some agencies either have a contract with some of these wildlife relocations, provide maybe reduced fees to residents. A lot of them do that. I know Vernon Hills, there was some discussion about the skunk issue. I think they went through, about $10,000. I think they ran out of money in a short time. So it could be a very expensive proposition, like if we start offering bounties on these animals.
And this year, they actually lowered that amount because of how it was bleeding through the budget.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. Yeah. So, I mean, I know, I had a neighbor that had a family of skunks take up residence, and basically, the solution they came to was that I don't want to promote anybody, but a company they called and came out and trapped them and removed them and stuff, and it worked, and I think that's the best. Yeah.
Most of, like I said, it's usually the property owner's responsibility if you have property to maintain that, and if you do have a problem. If the problem is as you start to pay for those services, say that the city or the police department started to offer those services up, you would see that we would burn through those funds quite a bit. And if somebody has a unique incident or situation that maybe they don't have the means, we might be able to work out something, or at least find some agency that could assist them in that point. But I could see where if we just start, offering those fees, because I said that does control my whole animal control budget, meaning all my stray dog fees, my kennel fees, all that. And if you start, like I said, the animals that are in this area actually travel, I think, a couple mile range. So a skunk, they could be coming from Arlington Heights and Mount Prospect and so forth. So there's thousands of these animals that if we actually started to, say we were going to pay for that, I think that would be very expensive.
No, I agree. I agree. And I just want to thank you for bringing this forward, though, and just so the residents are aware that we're not just ignoring, this, and, we're doing our due diligence, and you're right, it would bleed the money very quickly.
Yeah. And like I said, if there's a dangerous or sick animal, we will definitely come out to that. Obviously, I said public safety is first and foremost. I showed that picture of that raccoon, maybe be a little cute, but there is like the zombie raccoons you saw on TV recently. Mm-hmm. If there's a sick animal in the middle of the roadway at daytime causing a disturbance, the police department will definitely come out and address that issue. Right. No question about it. If there's a sick animal at a school ground or something like that, that would be, like I said, that is definitely a priority, and we will address those. It's just when we start getting into the nuisance types things, I got a skunk living under my deck. I really don't see it a lot. I can smell it every now and then. Right. We really don't have the means to be addressing all those issues. But like I said, if it's a rare situation where a person has no other alternative, we will definitely try to assist them as we can.
Wonderful.
And just for additional clarification, obviously we've already done some research on this in the past. Vernon Hills did lower the amount that they were going to be utilizing, and so they put in some additional requirements. And actually, when we had this discussion last time, the two main vendors who actually work around Rolling Meadows, they contacted me and said they were not appreciative that we were trying to make this into a governmental thing. And I tried telling them it's not a governmental thing. We're trying to work with everybody. I know from additional comments from Vernon Hills, they've also, with their new program, again, less money, they are also doing the house inspection. So let's say hypothetically you had that vermin critter, whatever you want to say, living under the stoop. If that was really where they were living, they're going to make you do the full repairs before they do. So they put additional requirements into that. I know that there's one alderman sitting to the left of me says critters are critters, and they end up going their way with the seasons. But again, we've been watching that, and I continue. There is one group that pretty regularly does call me and say, did you do anything about that? And I tell them, we've had discussions. There's $3,000 in the line item, but we haven't brought it back because of some of the other things that we're seeing with some of the other municipalities. But I can tell you with us, it's limited. We get more complaints about raccoons. We do get a few about the red fox that does run in an area.
Yeah.
Coyotes in another area. But again, each of these areas we do monitor. I know that Chief has actually watched surveillance from people's homes where you can see some of the critters come up to the area. But again, each of the pieces we do monitor, and I can tell you that the professionals who do come in, they do a very good job. And unfortunately, as another alderman knows, when we take out one vermin, other vermins follow, and it's not just one that we continue. And here at City Hall, we have actually trapped and euthanized in the past skunks because they were living by our trash compactor and some of the other areas. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, this is just a kind of a comment, not necessarily a question. Now, I know out in my area, last year I had a street that was repaved, so I went door to door to most of the people. One of the things that I found out was really interesting. Probably every second or third house had varmint underneath their stoop in the front yard, and they never even realized. You could see the holes dug under. So when I actually talked to people directly, I mentioned to them that they should try to block it off. The reason I bring it up, maybe if we do a newsletter about this in News and Views, maybe it's something we could include in there. The other thing out in our area that I know is a big issue is, Harper College lets a lot of their place go natural, which is wonderful for an environmental standpoint, but from a critter standpoint, all hell breaks loose.
Well, I mean, that's part of the challenge is, like I said, a lot of the areas that we did receive complaints, like even coyotes, it's right next to unincorporated areas or a forest preserve, and unless they control those areas, like I said, you'd be spending resources that are really going to have no impact at all. I know coyotes have been recently on the topic. I don't know if there was a rumor floating around that a couple dogs were killed by coyotes. We tracked down those to verify that. It did not occur. And actually, when I talked to the biologist about coyotes, she had told me that in this northeastern Illinois, a coyote has never been a human being ever, and you're talking about a multi-million-dollar population area ever, has a coyote ever attacked a individual. So, like I said, most of those animals, like I said, you could coexist with them. They're really more afraid of you, and like I said, as you say, they can live on your stoop and you don't even know it. But like I said, if any animal is a problem, like I said, we will try to address those. But there is a challenge regarding the geographic area where we are.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Alderman Diastis.
Thank you. Chief, you said the IDNR, you could get a permit. Now, is that to trap or to kill these nuisance varmints?
You have to get a permit in order to trap them, and part of the regulations are if you do trap one, you must kill the animal. It's against the law to catch it and then to release it to another area. So if you had like skunks and raccoons, she said specifically, you have to get a permit, even for the police department, in order to trap and do any type of animal control like that. Like I said, we have to actually get a permit from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. And she says you trap those animals, you must euthanize those animals. You can't let them go.
But just to clarify for anybody who might be watching, you cannot discharge a weapon within the city limits, correct?
Correct. There's no discharge of a firearm within city limits at all, and there's no hunting in the city either.
Right. So you can't just pick off a raccoon, or you can't trap a skunk and then take your firearm and go out in the backyard and shoot them.
Yeah, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, they have specific guidelines of how to euthanize those animals. And if you go to their website, all the information is on there. It's pretty extensive.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
It was great. Mr. Crumstock, we're going to talk about bonds.
So this is actually a place setter. This is a conversation that we're setting up for bond allocation / purchase at a later date. We do have Robert Rushlicki here from Ken McKenna and Associates, who's going to be here to go over some of the other pieces. Obviously, most of the aldermen around the room know Ken McKenna and Robert Rushlicki from the past whenever we do bonds or refinancing or any of those other pieces. And Bob also sits through when we have to go through S&P and any of our other bond rating and any other pieces that we do. But right now, staff is looking at a tentative $15 to $20 million bond issuance. And how is that calculated? That's really for all infrastructure. So it would be fire stations, it would be roads, it would be utilities, it would be a whole bunch of different things. Some of it, as the council has heard, might be catch-up, and some of it might be, as we've used the capital improvement committee, the ad hoc committee has talked about this backlog that we've actually have. And as the Alderman have also heard from Baxter Woodman when we originally talked, and that process is being redone again, so we have a better number. There's a litany of work that we need to do for the betterment of the city. So before we bring anything else, we are really here to talk about some of the additional information. We just want the go-ahead, if you want to talk about it, from City Council to continue as we maneuver on this. Our CAFR will be talked about in June, and as you heard, by July, hopefully we'll be ready for that next stage. So with that, I turn it over to Finance Director Melissa Gallagher, who will also have Robert Rushlicki.
Thank you, Mr. Crumstock. I'm going to just keep my comments very brief, and I have a one-page memo that I'll hand out to the City Council as Bob Rushlicki from K. McKenna goes through some of the initial scenarios. Again, these are working draft numbers. I will tell you that anybody that deals with the bond world knows that those numbers are going to change hourly. So they'll change as we keep moving forward, as we mentioned. The June Committee of the Whole meeting is where our auditors, Lauterbach and Amon, will present our 2017 audit. So that's being wrapped up right now. And Baxter and Woodman is working on the utility rate study so we can identify infrastructure improvements for utilities. And then we're also working with Public Works to identify the roadway improvements for bond issuance as well. And really at this point, tonight's discussion is just continuing our discussion where we left it off in August. At the August 15th Committee of the Whole meeting, we provided a discussion that really gave an understanding of bonds to the public and also to City Council and answered some questions then. So this right now is a sort of a first look at what we've been working on since then. The range is about 15 to 20 million, and Bob is going to go through all of those particulars. And then tonight, really, we're just looking for direction to continue the discussion with the city manager and authorize the city manager and the finance director to continue. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob Rushlicki.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. Good evening, everyone. What we did is take about 40, 50 pages and tried to put it on one page, so bear with us. The main, I think, points I wanted to make after talking with staff is, and the reason you do have various scenarios here, is to provide the city with flexibility over the next few months. And as you evaluate decisions that you have to make on behalf of the city, we're going to try to identify some of the main variables here which really impact your flexibility. And those variables really are, there's four big ones. One is the amount. Obviously, the more you borrow, the more the cost associated with it. So you have some control over the amount that you're considering. Another variable that's key as you look over impacts on debt service and cost is the term. Shorter term is going to be slightly less expensive because as you stretch out the term, the interest meter ticks on those extra years, and you're going to have additional cost. Third consideration is the interest rate. And, that's really one of the more important variables, because that is dictated by the marketplace, which has great impacts on the city and moves over ways that we can't control. I mean, really, some components of the interest rate have to do with the rating. I mean, right now for S&P, city's very strong. You're AA plus. I mean, there's only one other rating above that, and that would be AAA. So you guys are very strong as it relates to the S&P rating. There's this thing called bank qualified versus non-bank qualified, and really what that is it allows commercial banks a deduction on interest expense, which again is tied only to what they call small issuer. And a small issuer is really a city, it's public improvements, but it's 10 million that's issued in a calendar year. So really that benefit to the banks and to the interest rate kicks in only if you're 10 million or less, and we're going to get into that a little bit, why we broke out some of the issues between 2018 and 2019 to have a benefit of that. And the third part of the interest, is our call features. Right now, again, a shorter call allows you more flexibility, but the bonds then have a characteristic that the long-term investors may think, well, wait a minute, if you could call it every 5 or 7 or 10 years, there's usually going to be a price associated with it. What we did here for this vanilla kind of first cut is the most standard feature in the market's 10-year no call. But, it's possible, again, in discussions with underwriters and tracking the market to maybe make that a little shorter, a little lower for the city. But again, there's a cost associated with it as it relates to the interest rate. Like I said, the standard or vanilla, call features around 10 years. But again, our job is to research that and provide flexibility for the city. If you look at the chart in front of you, scenario 1 looks at just one bond issue, $15 million on either a 20 or 30-year maturity. And again, some of the principles that we talked about as it relates to by stretching it out, you could see that total debt service between the 20 and the 30, there's a differential of around $5 million. Again, that's because of the longer term. Longer term and the meters running on the proceeds that you borrow, so there is some differential there. Your average debt service, though, it's kind of a seesaw. Your average debt service is a little lower with the 30-year, but again, that's because you stretch it out. But again, the other trade-off for that is the interest cost. The interest cost on the 30-year, because the investors have to wait longer for the receipt of the dollars and more risk associated with a longer period of time, you could see there's a differential there of almost 30 or 40 basis points. So there is some differential there. Scenario 2 leads to that, again, another important variable, as I mentioned, about the interest rate. We split the issues up into 2 tranches in order to allow for that 10 million small issuer kind of definition. And there are some savings there. You got a slightly lower interest rate, about 10 basis points. But again, there is some risk. The assumption is that when you do your second issue, let's say in this case it's assumed it would happen in 2019, this assumes that the interest rates don't move up. That's really the one issue that we don't have control over, is time and what happens in the marketplace. But again, all things being equal, if the rates stay about the same, you could see that there are certain savings that could be attributable to the split. And we also looked at that from a 20 and a 30-year maturity. Again, you got the same kind of relationship that you saw on the single issuance, but again, it's defined by the fact that now you have 2 issues. In scenario 3 and the other scenarios that follow, we looked at, again, adjusting another variable, and that was the amount. So here you have a larger amount in order to get 19.5 or close to 19.5 of net proceeds. And again, you could look at what the differential is in terms of the gross interest cost, which is either 28 or 35 million, and again the average amounts. You could see that the average debt service again is going up, and it's tied purely to the amount. You've got again more more bonds that have to be issued. The interest rate situation is about the same as the scenario on the top. Again, the variable that we're adjusting here is the amount. And again, when we look at the bank qualified scenario, whether it's the 20 or 30 year, again, we have a split. We split the amounts to keep it under 10 million each of those years. And again, there are certain savings. We have some savings associated with the fact that it is bank qualified. There's a little bit of a discount to the banks that purchase this. But again, there's also the element of risk as it relates to what's the interest rate going to be, you know, in 19 or when you're going to issue the second tranche of bonds. So really, the purpose of this is to, you know, you've been talking as it relates to these improvements. You know, here's some idea of kind of putting a, you know, sticker, so to speak, of a price tag associated with what some of those costs could be in the marketplace as we currently are experiencing. Again, to the extent interest rates go up, we put in a little bit of a cushion here, about 0.25% over what you would have to borrow for now to allow for some fluctuation in the market. But obviously, again, if rates go up or inflation fears drive higher rates, you know, the numbers would have to be modified.
Thank you. Melissa, do you have another part to this? Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go.
And I'll just close and just add a couple minor points. Again, tonight's discussion was really so that Bob Richlicki from K. McKenna can kind of walk through a couple of items. Obviously, at the writing of this on May 15th, this is outdated already. So the second item is that we are also looking to manage the financial estimates that we're doing along with our financial advisors to figure out our annual debt service payments and how they would relate to our tax levy to make sure that the burden is not falling on the residents, and also timing it out with our infrastructure improvements. So this really is just more of a first blush, and then what we would do is fine-tune this over the next couple of months. And so then we would come back to City Council with some further fine-tuned numbers before we would issue. And I think the other important piece to remember too is that our annual debt service payments previous to the debt that had fallen off in 2017 and matured was about $2.5 million. And if we are looking at around 1.2 to 1.4 million as an annual debt service, plus the additional amount that we have out until 2023, we're at about that amount as well. And so it's a level that the city has paid down every year, and it's similar to that. So what we're trying to do right now is just as a first blush, give you some basic scenarios to kind of, again, these documents are about 70 pages every time we've run them through. We try not to kill too many trees, but at the same point, what we're just looking now is any questions that you might have initially, and then just give us further authorization to move ahead with the scenarios.
Thank you. Further discussion or questions from anybody on the council? Mr. Cannon?
Oh, yes, please do. Please do.
Go ahead.
One more item.
One more
Sorry.
item, Mr. Mayor. I just want to point out that in order to, you know, implement this plan, we would have to go to the market, which, you know, requires an official statement, a competitive bid situation. We do have to go to the rating agencies. So, you know, you're looking at a time period of about 30 to 45 days in order to ramp up to the point where we're going to be able to take the bonds to market and get a bid for the securities.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Cannon, you first up, please.
Thank you. A couple quick questions. You know, the first one, Melissa, I guess you can answer this if you want, or, you know, I know there's been a lot of negative press lately with some of the southern suburbs that are upside down on some of their bonds. Does that affect us even remotely, or does it make people more skittish about buying municipal bonds?
You guys are strong. I mean, a double A+, you're probably one of the top-tier credits in the state. And again, if I remember reading the credit reports from both Moody's and S&P, they identify that the city of Rolling Meadows actually has a below-average median debt service burden. So what happens with those suburbs, and I'm talking, you know, some of those were just grossly overfunded as it related to some of the obligations they brought on. And the one good thing about the rating agencies, they will look at each credit individually. The umbrella that we should be more concerned about is the state of Illinois. That affects everybody located within the state. That's unfortunately, that's more of a concern rather than, let's say, what some of these other suburbs have done. You know, they will look at your management, professional management, the way your debt is managed, as Melissa indicated, you guys have looked at a situation where his debt is rolling off, you're looking to replace it. You're not basically adding to the burden, a burden which already both rating agencies have considered below average. So,
And Alderman Cannon, they're also going to look for what it's actually being utilized. So when we talk about infrastructure, that's another reason why we say that, because that has long-term uses instead of short-term throwing it into something.
That's the other thing. I mean, the city's talking about public improvements. In fact, one of the key things that we have seen over the years is the rating agencies want to see what you're doing for your capital stock. If it's not going to be pay-as-you-go because of some of the costs of these, they actually think it's important that you're planning ahead and funding what you have to fund out of, let's say, bonds or in stretching out the payments with annual debt service payments. So they look at that carefully. And again, it's, as I said, what are the top three variables? It's the amount, the interest, and the term. And they will look at, from a standpoint of what your amount is, what it's going to be used for, and then what is your repayment plan and how it fits into your fiscal management. So those are key items.
Okay, so if we took the 20 million out, would that be looked at negatively at all by either of the rating agencies?
The question would be, where are you in terms of implementing those capital improvements? If these are key public facilities that have to be done, their question will be, how are you going to take care of that? And we would have to have a response that would show how that would be done, whether it was pay-as-you-go, or in this case, if it were bonds. The key that they look at is your replacement on capital inventory, capital costs. I mean, if these are considered items that are needed, they will want to find out how you plan to take care of it.
And they also want to know how you're guaranteeing that amount. So are you using property tax? Are you using utility funds? So they're always looking at that variable, how are you going to be paid?
So at this point, if theoretically we're still talking because we don't have anything locked down yet, we're not really looking at a tax increase for this program at the moment.
At this moment, I would tell you that in any of these scenarios, because we have not finished the 2019 budget, there will be some kind of change in the property tax overall. Because what we have falling off and how we've been utilizing, reallocating it into pensions and the overall, we would not be able on just one flush look to reallocate everything and then be flush. So we would still have a potential property tax increase. And then depending on what are the other pieces that we use? Are we using utilities? Are we using local roads? So all those pieces we have not worked on, but again, typically we've been doing an increase on the property taxes for the pensions and the reallocations in some of the other pieces. So at this point in time, I could tell you that there would probably be a property tax increase.
Okay, I guess the last point I would just make, with the write-up that was given to us, I was a little bit concerned because I didn't see anything about another public works facility that we don't have included in here. So I guess in the scenario, and I don't need an answer right now, but I mean, I think it's something we need to address with this program one way or another. We just can't ignore that and let it go away.
That is correct, and we deliberately, and I can tell you, I deliberately left it out because we've had those conversations and then people put it off to the side. What we're looking at this point in time with this issuance, or double issuance, if you want to call it, is specifically utilities, roads, and the infrastructure overall with the fire stations. So we did not take another shot at the old Public Works building because at this point in time, we haven't talked about it again. We need to reevaluate it. We need to do the assessment. And I know that certain aldermen have also mentioned in the past, maybe we can have additional communication and conversation about that and with another governmental entity.
Okay, thank you for the answers.
Well, my question that I would bring forward is, I would like to know what the cost is going to be to the residents. We haven't been told that yet. I realize it's just a scenario planning, but when you come back, what is the cost to the residents? It's nice to issue all these bonds and 2 fire stations, but to me, that's the most important is, how are the taxes going to be increased to the residents? We don't know that yet, so that question needs to be answered. Any other questions?
And Mr. Mayor, I would also just add, if you take a look at the 2018 budget and the previous budgets to that, just to answer that just kind of briefly, because we will come back to that at some point relatively soon. One of the things you want to look at in the budget is that we've been staying under a 5% increase for taxes over the last couple of years, mainly to address pensions, but we also added some funds for local roads. So it'll be similar to that, but it may be something that we need to keep evaluating over the next course of weeks and months, but it's similar to the 2018 budget. But again, we'll come back to you with that information.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments? I guess.
Do we have
yes, Mr. Budnitz?
Do we have a breakdown of the life expectancy of what we're looking to buy? I understand that some of the things like the firehouse is going to last for the 30 years plus if we were to amortize it out to 30 years, but some of the roads, if we're going to be looking at doing that, do we know if those are going to even be drivable in 30 years, or is that something that we would do over a 20-year period to make sure that we're not paying for it after it's no longer useful?
And that's something that I think that we, of course, need to evaluate when we're going through the
Right.
piece as well.
In fact, that's a good question. In fact, one of the things we're going to have to do once the city engages bond counsel is there has to be a schedule of the useful life of the assets that you're financing. So when they look at the weighted average term, so to speak, of the issue, they're going to compare it to the weighted average term of the assets and see if they should sync up or line up at a certain point.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion to adjourn? So, seconded? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.